Before Donald Trump came along, American politicians did not simply deny the deaths of thousands of Americans because they thought those deaths made them look bad. How things have changed. Here's Robert Costa today, spoke to more than a dozen House Republicans here at the Capitol. Very few had any criticism of the president's handling of the coming storm or his tweets on Puerto Rico. Most offered hearty praise, a revealing snapshot of the GOP. With me now, MSNBC political analyst Jason Johnson, politics editor of The Root, MSNBC contributor Jennifer Rubin, conservative columnist of The Washington Post, and New York University associate professor Cristina Beltran. Jennifer, I will show that the president just in the last few minutes, I guess, tweeted a Lou Dobbs segment defending his utterly odious comments on Puerto Rico. And I got to say, everyone, okay, the president says horrible things and people sort of, they hate it. But this felt to me like the kind of thing that you should resign over or announce yourself as the anonymous op-ed writer. I mean, there are 3,000 people that died, and you're saying they didn't die. That's about as disgusting as it gets.
It is. It's an insult to them, to their families, to the rescue workers. Imagine if George Bush said, what 3,000 people that died on 9/11? The country would be in open revolt, and we should be over this as well. And I think the realization is about to hit home for Republicans that this is a loser for them. Donald Trump dominates the news with these crazy pants theories and statements, and they are tied at the hip with him. And no wonder their polls are dropping like a stone. No wonder they're double digits behind in the congressional generic polling. They are identified with this crazy stuff, and their spinelessness, their encouragement, their enabling is going to come back to haunt them in November.
There's also something, Cristina, just so we were wrestling today with what to call it. It's not a lie because that's too weak. It's denialism. It's basically saying that the people don't exist.
Right. They're not really people. They might not really be human beings. They don't really exist for him as part of the political community we share. I mean, I think one of the things that always strikes me so much about Donald Trump is that he only understands spectacular violence in a particular way. Like I think of, there's a scholar, Rob Nixon, talks about slow violence. He talks about that in the United States, but particularly with someone like Trump who only understands the spectacular. He doesn't, so the day of the storm, 9/11, the kind of spectacular moment of death, that's the moment he recognizes. But the kind of long-term damage that the storm did, the sort of slow, often not fully visible violence to him, and the death of a huge number of our Puerto Rican compatriots, fellow citizens, but also non-white colonial subjects for him. This is a classic example of of the colonial gaze. He doesn't really see them as existing as part of the polity. So why would he acknowledge them in death when he couldn't acknowledge them politically in life? And he only sees death when he sees
that's
massive catastrophe.
The point about it is that what is so absurd, sort of unnerving about it is that, Jason, to Christina's point, I think he's telling the truth about what he really believes. Yeah, that is more horrifying than it as calumny. I mean, he thinks that the deaths, they didn't exist, they didn't count, they were invented by my enemies.
Right, they don't matter. Chris, I've said all along that the president's response, this administration's response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico is white nationalism manifested as policy, right? These people do not matter. They do not deserve to be protected. They do not deserve our assistance one way or another. And it wouldn't surprise me if the president didn't even know that Puerto Ricans were American citizens. But the fact that he simply denies their existence, look, this shouldn't surprise anyone. He denied that Obama was born in this country. He lied about how many people were at his inauguration, like he's a perpetual liar. But the fact that the Republican Party as a whole, the only people who can find the stomach to say something about this are Republicans who are on the line electorally this fall in Florida is indicative of the fact that the party as a whole has become a cult.
I thought it was so perfect. DeSantis, who ran as a cultist. I mean, that was almost tongue-in-cheek. I will give it to him. I mean, in his defense, it's a sort of shticky tongue-in-cheek ad. I'm so into Trump, my kid builds the wall. But for him to have to say, no, this is, out of bounds because I need these people's votes. But the most... Jennifer, in some ways, the worst thing said today to me was not the president. It was Paul Ryan. I want to play this because I read it before, but I actually haven't had the tape. I want to play what Paul Ryan said today.
Casualties don't make a person look bad. That's not. So I have no reason to dispute these numbers. I was in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. It was devastated. This was a horrible storm. Those are just the facts of what happens when a horrible hurricane hits an isolated place like an island.
It's not an isolated place.
No.
We have airplanes. It's 2000. It's the 21st century. It's not the 1600s. What the hell kind of thing was that to say?
He is in complete enabling mode. He knows Trump is upset, so he's trying to communicate with him across the airways. It's okay, Mr. President. It's not your fault. You know what? It is his fault. He's in charge of the federal government. It is his fault. But this is the disgusting portrait that we see over and over again by Paul Ryan. Do you know he went to the Ronald Reagan Institute and talked about American values and American leadership in the world today? I mean, how he does this with a straight face is really beyond me. He has done this from day one. He has been one of the, I think, worst enablers that have been out there. He refused to censure him over Charlottesville, and it's been downhill ever since. So it doesn't surprise me. It still horrifies me, but it doesn't surprise me.
And then what's so unnerving is that the way that this works is yesterday there was no position in American politics that those deaths were made up. That didn't exist as a position, Cristina. Today, that is now a position. And there are a bunch of people, American citizens and political leadership, who will now have that position.
Right. That can now be a somewhat legitimate talking point, right? And I think this connects to the climate change issue that we were talking about before. I mean, what's really interesting is there is mass death occurring in multiple locations. We are in the middle of a global catastrophe with climate. And so there's deaths happening on the island. You know, tonight is a story of, like, there's a catastrophe happening in our country that is happening slowly and consistently and constantly. And there's this really weird way in which someone like Ryan is standing there, and there's blood everywhere. There's bodies on the ground, both literally and figuratively. There's bodies in the future, and the sort of complete and utter capitulation, their moral capitulation over the crisis that they failed to address in the past and the crises they're failing to address in the future, because they don't seem to understand the very fundamentals of what they're doing and who they're doing them to.
Jason.
I got to say this, and I don't want to rant on everyone's parade, but the problem also that I see in all this is it's not going to impact Donald Trump. No. If you look at the political science, if you look at Hurricane Andrew with Bush, if you look at Katrina, basically what ends up happening when a president fails to adequately address this kind of national thing, people just harden their opinions. They don't usually hold them accountable. I hope they hold them accountable in the midterms, but we don't know.
I don't think it helps, to Jennifer's point, I don't think it helps politically the people in his party who are the ones who are on the ballot. But ultimately, the only accountability for what happened in Puerto Rico, and God willing, not what happens tonight or in any other future disaster, will be in Congress. Jason Johnson, Jennifer Rubin, and Cristina Beltran, thank you for being with me tonight.